think I've actually met most of you guys. If we've not met, I'm Brad Montgomery. As this slide says, I am the programmer guy at Work for Pi. And you can check us out at workforpi.com, or I'm on Twitter at BK Montgomery. And so I'm going to talk about something that I know is near and dear to everyone's heart, and that is IP, intellectual property. I am, of course, joking, because this is a subject that nobody really cares anything about, right? Especially if you're the guy who does this kind of work. It deals with the law, the legal code, and gosh, that's just not very interesting, is it? So I am going to, big fat disclaimer, I'm not a lawyer, right? So if you ever need advice on the law, find an actual real lawyer. But I did read this book, so I'm going to talk a little bit about what I learned.
You stay here to Holiday Inn?
Not this one. How many of you are developers? How many of you actually write code? Okay. How many of you do that for your job? Okay, cool. How many of you use open source software? How many of you build open source software? How many of you just kind of jump in and occasionally contribute to open source software? Okay. So we kind of saw a decreasing number of hands with all those questions. A lot of this talk kind of focuses around open source software, but that's not where you can pigeonhole all this. So a lot of this is applicable to any code that you might post on a blog, for instance. So how many of you have a blog where you post code? All right, so this applies to you as well. I'm going to run through 3 classes of common open source licenses. The academic licenses, the reciprocal licenses, and some of the permissive licenses. Now there's tons of open source licenses, but these are the most popular. And all a license does, it's the law, it's the legal framework that tells you how you can use a piece of software or some code that you got from a blog post. So 2 of my personal favorites, because the licenses are short, easy to read, and easy to understand, are these academic licenses, the MIT and the BSD. And the gist of these are you can take these and do whatever you want. You can use them in your open source project, you can use them in your closed source project, you can modify them, you can redistribute, you can do whatever you want. You just get no warranty, right? It may break, you may break it, oh well. It's all of you on how you use the code. The GPL. This is a really popular license, and I think one project in particular made it so, and that's Linux. This is the license under which the Linux kernel is distributed. And in a nutshell, you can actually take GPL code and do whatever you want with it. But as long as you begin to share that, you get tagged by this clause that says anything that you distribute must also be GPL. Some people refer to this as a viral license. Because any changes you make, anything you integrate this code into, if you distribute it somehow, it is also GPL. The Apache license and the MPL. Firefox is distributed under the MPL. A lot of Chef stuff is Apache license. These are actually 2 licenses that larger companies and big corporations like. They're pretty lenient on how you can use the code. You can basically take the code and do whatever you want, but there are some clauses that say you won't hold any patent. Like if you have a patent on some technology, you won't sue the authors of the code. If you do, it triggers something that says you give up your right to use this copyrighted code. So there's a few loopholes. There's a few things that close patent loopholes. These licenses tend to be a longer read, so sit down and read them. If they're interesting, give yourself a couple hours. It'll take that. So those are kind of the main gist of what open source licenses are like. like. And if you write a blog or if you read a lot of tech blogs, you might have seen things like Creative Commons. There's a number of those that have similar kinds of stipulations. Okay, let's say you open source some code. So you write a little library, or you write a blog post with just a function that says, hey, here's a cool way I do this. People see it, people use it, you say, yeah, take this, do whatever you want. Can you actually do that? Is it okay to do that? How many of you think that, yeah, it's okay if I contribute to open source? How many of you would feel comfortable going out and writing code that you can put out on GitHub? Okay. How many of you have ever heard of this thing? Yeah, a PIA. It may live under a different name, but it's essentially, do you remember when you got hired at the company that you work for now? And you signed a whole bunch of papers during the HR process, and you didn't read half of them, and they just, yeah, sure, everybody's got to sign those, don't worry. Well, one of those, if you work at a company where you produce software, one of those is probably a proprietary information agreement. And a lot of companies do this and don't even realize what the language says because it's kind of been a cookie cutter document that's been around for decades. And so basically, a number of these have this stipulation. Anything that you do here, anything that you build here, anything that you create is owned by the company. And it's even really common that there's language that says anything that you create, period, is owned by the company. So this means on your own time, on the weekends, with your own equipment. Now, this varies from state to state. If you live in California, companies can't say that to you. Your own time is yours. Places like Arkansas, I think Tennessee, this still happens. So, you go out on a Saturday, you write a nice little library, not anything related to anything you do in your day job. Maybe you're playing around with Haskell or doing some cool Lisp stuff, and you push it out on GitHub. You may not actually have the legal right to do that. Scare anybody yet?
No.
It's actually not my intention. Yeah, I'm like building up. There's a build up here, right? So, one word of caution. If you have an HR department, go back and take a look at some of those documents that you signed when you joined your company. Ask your boss. They may not even know. Find out what sort of proprietary information agreement you've got with your employer. Make sure that you actually have the right to publish stuff when you do publish it. Maybe you do. Maybe you do have that. Maybe your employer did not have this sort of agreement. I've actually worked in places where there was no agreement at all.
Didn't you get busted for posting something on Twitter? At Southwest?
Totally different story. I got busted for calling a vendor out for being a terrible vendor. And it turns out I was right. Yeah, so totally. I was not busted too bad. More embarrassing for other people in other departments. So maybe you do have the right to do this. But wait a minute. Maybe you do have the right to publish an open source project, and you have this stuff out on GitHub, and people start using it, and it's really popular. Okay, I got this cool library, something's broken, awesome. Somebody forked it, they fixed it, now they're sending me a pull request, which means they've made some changes to my library, and they're saying, hey, incorporate those changes back into your library. That's part of the glory of open source software. That's why it's so good and so robust, but there's a problem here. What if the guy or the lady who forked my project, fixed my bugs, and now sending that back to me has signed one of these proprietary information agreements, and they don't actually have the legal right to contribute code, but don't realize that. So think about that for a minute. If I accept this, and they work for Acme Incorporated. And Acme Incorporated says, I own everything that they create. I just have integrated proprietary code into my open source project. I'm sure this happens. I'm sure people don't even realize it happens. And for the most part, I'm sure that a lot of companies are not ever going to try to follow up on this when it does happen. I know for a fact that some companies kind of turn a blind eye. So, what happens? What do you do when that happens? What do you do when you accept a pull request and it's possible that someone doesn't have the legal right to contribute to your project? Okay, that's a problem, and I don't actually have an answer to that solution. So it may seem that what I've done so far is spread a lot of FUD, right? Fear, uncertainty, and doubt. This may actually be a real brain. It's pretty awesome if it is. But that's not my goal here. It's not my goal to spread fear. I'm a big proponent of open source software. It's a great process. The quality of the code that is produced is amazing. Everything I do, everything, my business, my professional career has all been based on building on top of open source software. So I'm a huge fan. So all this kind of scary stuff that I've been talking about, well, hey, it's okay. Maybe you did sign one of those proprietary information agreements. Maybe you don't have the property rights to some code that you write on the weekend, but there's a way you can still play. It's not all tears. So the secret, talk about what you're doing. Be open about what you're doing. Tell your employer. Talk to them. Find somebody in your company. Let's say you do go look at the paperwork you signed when you joined your employer. And wow, I really did sign one of these things. It says right there, everything that I produce belongs to Acme Incorporated. There's my signature. Find your employer. Find somebody with decision-making authority and tell them, hey, I'm going to spend this weekend working on this project, right? I have this idea. I'd like to open source it. Is that okay? Do this in writing. It means email. Like, don't actually write it on real paper. Send them an email, right? And if they say yes, that means the company gives you their blessing. You now have the ability to build that software, to write that blog post, to publish that code, or publish a fix to that library. I'm actually a co-founder of the company that I work for, and it's a funny thing, there's two of us, and we both signed these proprietary information agreements. Our lawyer said you had to, right? It's protecting the company. But I'm still doing open source development, and I'm still publishing things. So I send Cliff an email, hey man, this would be a cool thing to open source. It's not part of our core business. Are you okay with that? He sends me a reply that says yes, we're good. Kind of funny, but that's the way it works. The law is the law, right? And you don't want to get mixed up on the wrong side of that thing. So changing jobs. How many of you have ever liked to change jobs before? You probably will again sometime. Keep this in mind next time you talk to another employer. Pay attention to the paper that they put in front of you. I've been really guilty of just going, sign my name, push it through, sign my name, push it through. There tends to be so much just junk paperwork. Stop for a minute. Look out for one of these things, because I didn't know this. Those are often accompanied with a sheet of paper that says, tell us about anything that you've published, or tell us about anything that you have done for another employer or something that you maintain. You have an opportunity to say, this is my work before I work for you. This belongs to me. And they can't claim anything. You can even tell them about ideas that you haven't started working on. Hey, I had this idea for a video game that's kind of like this, and I've been working on it on my part-time. They cannot claim it. If you say beforehand, this is something that I'm working on. Your current projects, ideas for future projects, let them know. Something else I didn't know. When you sign a contract, this is like in any sort of business deal, business transaction, you can actually take a pen and mark out bits of the contract you don't like. Like if you go work for a company and they put something in front of you that you don't like, you can negotiate all those terms. Did not know you could do this. So they put a proprietary information agreement in front of you. Just say, I don't agree to this. Of course, they may not hire you. That's, you know, well, right. But there might be some middle ground there. So you can negotiate these sorts of things. So the bottom line, when it comes to intellectual property, it's good to kind of do some reading, find out what your state says about the work that you do on your own time, off the clock. Find out what your employer says they own as far as your work and your ideas. Right? It varies. Just be aware that this is an issue. And when you do get out and engage, like in open source development, if you know you don't have the right to contribute to something, don't put another project in jeopardy. It really sucks. If you know how to fix a problem, you can report problems in open source projects. You can talk about how someone might fix it. But if you don't have the right to contribute to code, don't put the project in jeopardy. And last thing, keep it safe, right? If you do engage in publishing a blog or publishing code, talk to your boss. Don't keep it secret. Don't work in private and think, well, like technically my company thinks they own this, but I can keep it secret and kind of fly under the radar. You might can do that. Most people do. But keep in mind that puts your code in legal jeopardy. Keep it safe. Don't keep it secret. So everything that I've talked about, I learned from this book and more. Lots of information about patents, which is a whole other talk. This guy, Van Limburg, he's a Python guy. He's also a lawyer. Follow him on Twitter. Really smart guy. And I personally think everybody who writes software at any level should read this book. So check it out. It's an O'Reilly book. It took me a while to read it, but it's a good read. Thanks.
Rather than set up an